Walked out of my own anniversary party with $47 in my purse and nowhere to go. That was 11 months ago. I know exactly how much I had because I counted it in the cab, watching the streetlights blur past the window, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life or the first smart decision I'd made in years. Let me back up. My name is Eugenia. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a contracts administrator for a commercial real estate firm in Columbus, Ohio. I know how to read fine print. I know what happens when people sign things they haven't read. I know what a forged signature looks like, because I've flagged 3 of them in my career, and I know the sound a room makes when you walk out of it and nobody calls your name. That sound followed me out into the November cold that night, and honestly, it was the sound that saved me. My husband Gerald passed 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. He was 62. We'd had 34 years together, and we were 2 years from his retirement, 2 years from the trip to Portugal we'd been planning since our honeymoon. The cancer didn't care about Portugal. It didn't care about any of it. After Gerald died, I kept working because I needed somewhere to put myself. I sold the house in Westerville, too big, too quiet, and bought a townhouse in Clintonville. Smaller, manageable. A garden in the back that I didn't know what to do with at first, and then couldn't stop doing things with. I planted tomatoes. Then peppers. Then, the second summer, a rose bed along the fence that Gerald would have loved and never gotten to see. My son, Randall, was 38 when his father died. He handled it the way Randall handles most things, practically, efficiently, and without much visible emotion. He flew in from Denver, handled the funeral arrangements, shook everyone's hands, ate the casseroles the neighbors brought over, and flew back 4 days later. His wife Camille came with him. She was polite the way people are polite when they're performing politeness. Everything she said to me that week had the texture of something rehearsed. I told myself I was being uncharitable. She'd never had much warmth toward me, but she wasn't cruel. She called on holidays. She remembered my birthday. She sent Christmas cards with their 2 boys, Nolan and Jake, my grandsons, who I love fiercely and saw maybe twice a year. For a while, that was enough. For a while, I told myself the distance was just geography. I was wrong about that too. The trouble started, as it often does, with money. Not a dramatic amount at first, small things. Randall called me in March, about 2 years ago, and said they were in a tight spot. Camille had left her job. Something about the work environment, he said, something I didn't fully understand, and their mortgage in Denver had just adjusted. Could I help with 1 month? Just bridge the gap. I sent $3,000. I didn't think much of it. Then in June, there was a car repair. Then in September, Jake's tuition for a private school they'd enrolled him in. He has some learning differences, Mom. The public school just isn't equipped. And could I cover 2 months while they sorted out their finances? I sent it. I always sent it. Because Randall was my son, and those were my grandsons, and I had the money, and they needed it. That's what you do. What I didn't realize, what I had no reason to suspect, was that Randall had not told Camille how often he was calling me. He told her once, maybe twice. He hadn't told her it had become a pattern. He hadn't told her how much, and Camille, when she found out, did not get angry at Randall. She got a plan. The anniversary party was my idea, which is the part that still stings a little. I thought it would be good for us, all of us. 7 years since Gerald died. Nolan was now 17. Jake, 14. I wanted a real family dinner, something warm and intentional. I rented a private room at a restaurant I loved, a place in Short North that Gerald and I used to go for anniversaries when the boys were little. I paid for everything. I handled the invitations, the menu, the flowers on the table, small white dahlias, because those were Gerald's favorites, and I always put them out when I wanted to feel like he was still in the room. Randall and Camille flew in. The boys were there. My sister-in-law Patrice came, and my oldest friend Deb, who has known me since we were both 22 and working at the same firm, and complaining about the same supervisor. It was a good evening for a while. Nolan had grown 4 inches since I'd last seen him. Jake had gotten into photography and showed me pictures on his phone. Really good ones. Light and composition he had no business knowing at 14. I felt full in the way you only feel at a table where everyone you love is present. Then Camille said it. We were between the salad and the entree. The conversation had drifted to the townhouse. Deb had asked if I was still thinking about downsizing, and I'd said I wasn't, that I liked where I was. And Camille laughed, this small laugh that she didn't quite swallow fast enough, and said, "It's funny you're holding on to that place so tightly. You know you can't take it with you." I looked at her. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second, then looked down at her wineglass. The table went a little quiet. Deb gave me a look. Patrice suddenly became very interested in her bread plate. Randall said nothing. He cut his salad and said nothing, and that nothing told me everything I needed to know about what was happening in their house. I didn't make a scene. I smiled. I changed the subject. I ate my dinner, and I opened the little gifts people had brought, and I hugged my grandsons, and I paid the check. And in the cab home I counted $47, and I thought about what Camille had said, and the way Randall had not said anything at all. "You can't take it with you." She wasn't talking about the afterlife. I want to tell you I moved fast after that. I didn't. I spent 2 weeks in a fog of trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I'd misread it. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe it was a bad joke. Then I called my financial advisor just to check in, just to look at things. And she mentioned gently that she'd gotten a call 3 weeks prior from someone asking questions about my accounts. The caller had identified herself as my daughter-in-law acting on my behalf. I had never asked Camille to do that. I had never authorized it. My financial advisor, bless her, had declined to provide any information. But she'd assumed I knew about the call, so she hadn't flagged it to me until I happened to call that day. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Ruth who I'd worked with on Gerald's estate. I told her what had happened. I told her about the dinner and the call and the pattern of requests for money that had been going on for 2 years. I told her I was 68 years old and I wanted to understand exactly where I stood legally, financially, and practically. Ruth told me to come in the next morning and bring everything I had. I brought everything I had. What we found over the next 3 weeks was worse than I'd expected. Someone had submitted a request to change the beneficiary designation on one of my annuity accounts, not the primary ones. A smaller one I rarely looked at, about $60,000. The paperwork had my signature on it. It was not my signature. It was close. It was very close. But I have signed my name the same way for 40 years, with a particular loop on the G that I developed in college and have never lost. Whoever had copied it didn't know about the loop. Ruth brought in a forensic document examiner. Took 3 days. The conclusion was unambiguous. I did not sign that paperwork. The beneficiary it had been changed to was a trust I'd never heard of, structured to benefit Randall and Camille jointly. I sat in Ruth's office when she told me, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger, and already come and gone. It was more like clarity. The particular clarity you get when the thing you were afraid might be true turns out to definitely be true, and you realize the fear was actually worse than the knowing. Now I knew. Now I could work. Ruth filed a formal complaint with the annuity company and initiated the reversal. She contacted the relevant financial institutions. She recommended I also revisit my will, my power of attorney documents, and every beneficiary designation I had on record, which I did over the following 2 weeks, with the same thoroughness I used to bring to contracts at my old firm. I also did not call Randall. This is the part people always want to ask about. Why didn't I call him? Why didn't I confront them? Why didn't I demand answers? Because I had spent 2 years sending money every time I was asked. I had spent 7 years being a convenient grandmother, close enough to be useful, far enough away not to be a presence. I had sat at a table and been told I couldn't take my own house with me, and the man who was supposed to be my son had said nothing. I did not owe Randall a confrontation. I owed myself something else. I owed myself a clean exit. I want to be honest about something here, because it matters, and because I've had a lot of time to sit with it. My daughter-in-law is not the whole story. She isn't even most of it. Randall called me every time there was a gap in their budget. He knew the calls had become a pattern. He knew how much he'd taken, and I say taken because there's a difference between asking and taking when the person you're asking has never said no and has been conditioned not to. I made that conditioning. I never said no to Randall. Not when he was 8, not when he was 20, not when he was 38 and perfectly capable of managing his own finances if he'd been required to. His father and I did that. We made it easy. We made it so easy that when the money started to not be easy, he found someone else to make it easy again. And when she couldn't do it honestly, she did it the other way. I was not blameless. I needed to hold that. But holding it didn't mean I had to keep paying for it. I stopped answering Randall's calls in December. I didn't block him. I simply let it ring and waited. The first week, 4 calls, 2 voicemails. The voicemails were casual, just checking in, how are you doing? Give me a call when you get a chance. The second week, 7 calls. 1 voicemail that was less casual, a slight edge in his voice, something about how he'd been trying to reach me. The third week, 11 calls. A voicemail from Camille, which I had not expected. Her voice was different, not the rehearsed politeness, something tighter. She said there had been some confusion about paperwork she wanted to explain. Could I please call her back? I did not call her back. By January, Randall had apparently called Patrice, my sister-in-law, asking if she'd heard from me. Patrice called me. I answered. Are you alive? She said. Very much, I said. Your son thinks something's happened to you. Something has, I said. I just haven't decided yet how much I want to explain. Patrice, who had known Gerald for 40 years and had been at that anniversary dinner and had seen Camille's face when she said what she said, did not push me. She said, Okay, tell me what you need. I told her I needed a few more weeks. She said she'd tell Randall I was fine, traveling, staying with an old friend, which was not entirely untrue. I did spend 2 weeks in January visiting Deb, who lives now in Savannah, and it was 60 degrees and sunny, and I sat on her porch and drank coffee every morning and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was breathing properly. In February, Ruth and I had everything in order, every account reviewed, every document updated, a new power of attorney designating Patrice and Deb jointly. 2 people who had never once looked at my assets and calculated what they might eventually inherit. My will revised. The annuity fraud complaint moving through the proper channels, which Ruth said could result in criminal referral depending on how the investigation went. I had also, quietly, stopped the automatic transfers I'd had set up for Randall. I'd started those transfers 2 years ago, at his request. Just a monthly amount, he'd said, just while they were stabilizing. I'd treated it like a utility bill. I just stopped paying it. That, more than anything, is what finally made him call with a different voice. It was a Thursday afternoon in late February. I answered because I'd decided I was ready. Mom. His voice cracked on the word, just that one syllable. Mom. What is happening? I let a moment pass. Hello, Randall. I've been trying to reach you since December. I thought something had happened to you. I'm fine, I said. I'm sorry you were worried. Are you? Is this because of what Camille said at the dinner? Because that came out wrong, she didn't mean, Randall. I kept my voice even. I know about the annuity paperwork. The silence that followed was long enough that I could hear him breathing. I don't know what you're. The beneficiary change. The signature that isn't mine. My attorney has the forensic report. The annuity company is conducting their own investigation. I paused. I'm not calling the police myself. That isn't my decision to make anymore. But I thought you should know where things stand. Another long silence. Then, very quietly, I didn't know she was going to do that. I believed him, and it didn't change anything. I know you didn't know about that specific thing, I said, but you knew about the pattern, Randall. You knew how much you'd asked for. You knew you hadn't told her. You let it go on because it was easier than stopping it, and because you've always found a way to let hard things be my problem instead of yours. I taught you that. That one is on me. He started to say something. I talked over him gently. I love you. I love Nolan, Jake. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not dying. I'm not disappearing. I'm not cutting you off forever. But I need you to understand that things are different now. I'm not the same version of your mother that you've been counting on. That version isn't available anymore. What does that mean? His voice was small. He sounded like he was 16. It means I need you to figure out how to live on what you earn. It means Camille needs to face what she did. It means when you're ready to have a real conversation, not a call to ask me for something, not a call to manage damage, but an actual conversation where we talk honestly. I'll answer. I let that sit for a moment. And Randall? The rose bed in my backyard is doing beautifully this year. You should bring the boys to see it sometime. Your father would have liked knowing his grandsons grew up to be the kind of young men who appreciated that kind of thing. I didn't wait for him to respond. I said goodbye and I hung up. I won't pretend that call fixed everything. It didn't. Randall and I have spoken 3 times since then. Real conversations, halting them uncomfortable in the way that honest conversations usually are when you've been avoiding them for a decade. He told me things I hadn't known about his marriage, about the pressure he'd been under, about the ways he'd convinced himself that what he was doing wasn't really asking, it was just family. I told him things too. About Gerald, about the ways I'd made it too easy and why. About the $47 in my purse in the cab that night, and the sound of a room when nobody calls your name. He cried. I let him. I didn't cry, which surprised me, but I think I'd done most of my crying in Savannah on Deb's porch. Camille is a separate matter. Ruth tells me the investigation is still ongoing. I don't know yet what the outcome will be. I've thought about what I want, whether I want accountability or just distance, and I haven't fully settled it yet. I think that's okay. Some things take longer than others to know. Nolan came to visit in April. Just him, not his parents. He drove himself. He has his license now, which stunned me because in my mind he is still 12 years old building a bird feeder in my kitchen. He sat at my table and ate 2 plates of pasta and told me about his plans for after graduation and asked me, almost shyly, whether I thought his grandfather would have liked him. I told him the truth. I said Gerald would have been ridiculous about him. I said Gerald used to stop strangers to tell them about his grandsons, and the strangers would have to politely back away while he found pictures on his phone. Nolan laughed and I laughed, and for a few minutes the kitchen sounded exactly the way a kitchen is supposed to sound. The dahlias are blooming again. I put a new row in along the east fence this year, Gerald's favourites, white, with the particular fullness they get in July when the light is right. I sit with them in the evenings sometimes, just for a few minutes before the day gets dark. I don't know what my daughter-in-law thought she was going to find when she started looking at my accounts. Maybe she thought I was a soft target. Maybe she thought age made me easy. Maybe she'd been watching me for years and concluded that a woman who never said no would never say stop. She was working with outdated information. I'm 68 years old. I've buried a husband, raised a son, signed 40 years of contracts, and grown a garden in soil that took me 3 seasons to get right. I know how to wait. I know how to read fine print. And I know, better than most, that the most important signature you'll ever put on anything is the one where you write yourself back into your own life. I did that. I'm still doing that. And I've got a lot of garden left to grow. I've thought a lot about what Camille actually believed when she made that call to my financial advisor. I think she believed I was the kind of woman who wouldn't check, who had gotten soft with age or distracted by grief, or so accustomed to being helpful that I'd stopped being watchful. She looked at 68 years of her life and saw a balance she could quietly redirect. What she didn't account for was that the same woman who spent 4 decades reading contracts, the fine print, the buried clauses, the language people slide past hoping nobody notices, was still reading, still noticing. Age didn't dull that. If anything, losing Gerald sharpened it. When you've watched the person you love most become someone who can no longer protect himself, you learn very fast how to protect yourself. That's the thing about consequences. They don't come because the universe is keeping score. They come because actions have weight, and weight has direction, and eventually everything lands somewhere. Camille's actions landed exactly where actions like hers tend to land. In a room with an attorney and a forensic document examiner, and paperwork that told the truth she'd tried to rewrite. Randall's consequences were quieter but no less real. He had to look at himself honestly, maybe for the first time. Had to reckon with the fact that he'd built a life on a foundation of his mother's willingness to say yes, and that when I finally said no, the whole structure wobbled. That's not punishment. That's just what happens when the thing you've been leaning on steps aside. You find out how well you can actually stand. I don't say any of this with satisfaction. I say it because I think it's true, and I think the truth is worth saying clearly. The way we behave toward people teaches them what they can expect from us, And when we change the lesson, the people around us have to change too. I taught Randall for 38 years that I would absorb whatever he needed absorbed. Changing that lesson was hard. It was the hardest thing I've done since Gerald's last month. But it was also the most honest thing. And honesty, the kind that costs you something, not the easy kind, is where character actually lives. Not in the times you're generous when it's convenient. In the times you tell the truth when it would be so much simpler to let it go. Nolan sat at my kitchen table in April and asked me if his grandfather would have liked him. I told him yes, without hesitation, because it was true. But I also thought, sitting there watching this 17-year-old eat pasta and talk about his future with his quiet, grounded confidence, I thought, this is what it looks like when a young person is building something real. Not inheriting ease. Building. That's all any of us can do. Build it ourselves, hold it ourselves, know the difference between what we've earned and what we've only been handed, because the things we earn are the only things that stay. I'm still in my townhouse in Clintonville. The dahlias came back fuller this year than last. I sit with them in the evenings sometimes, and I don't feel like a woman who was taken from. I feel like a woman who paid attention just in time. That's enough. That's more than enough.